Studies show that the best leaders have high emotional intelligence. But what is emotional intelligence? And can someone become more emotionally intelligent? And if so, how? Well, my guest today is an expert on emotional intelligence. He's written several books on the topic. He's going to help us understand what it is and learn how it can make us better leaders. Let's jump in. Welcome to the Intentional Leader Podcast, a place to be refreshed, renewed, and encouraged as you lead yourself, your family, and your team. I'm Cal, and I'm really grateful to have Dr. Stein on the podcast today. Dr. Stein is a world-renowned clinical psychologist and a leading expert on emotional intelligence and hardiness. Dr. Stein is the author of The EQ Leader, Emotional Intelligence for Dummies, and The EQ Edge. He's also the co-author of the book Hardiness, Making Stress Work for You to Achieve Your Life Goals. On this episode, we cover a lot. We define emotional intelligence. We discuss how emotional intelligence is different from IQ and your personality. We jump into how, as a leader, you can be both empathetic and be mission focused. And then we dive into the hardiness and the power of visualization. As always, please make sure you subscribe wherever you're getting this podcast, or if you're watching us on YouTube. I also really appreciate all of you who continue to leave reviews on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. I read all of those, and that continues to help this show grow, continue to reach new leaders, and get great guests. So without any further ado, please enjoy this conversation with Dr. Stein. All right. Well, Dr. Stein, welcome to the Intentional Leader Podcast. Excited to have you on today.
Oh, nice to be with you, Cal.
So I wanted if we could define a few terms just up front, because I want to weave a couple of these in throughout, and I want to hear some of your story. Two terms that you have dealt with a lot. One's emotional intelligence, and then this other one is hardiness. What's emotional intelligence?
So emotional intelligence, it's a relatively new idea. It came out about 25 years ago. And back in the early days, there were very few definitions. But since it's grown, there are a multitude of definitions. But there's three things that all the definitions have in common. So one is the ability to be aware of your own emotions and the emotions of other people. The second factor is the ability to manage your own emotions and manage the emotions of others. And thirdly is the ability to use emotions to help you get things done. You know, if you're like an athlete, to help you in performance, or if you have to get a task done, to motivate yourself to get that task done. So those three concepts sort of transcend all the different definitions that are out there.
And when did you mention it was fairly recent? When did it start coming into the common lingo? When did we start hearing about emotional intelligence?
Well, the first paper that was published by Peter Salovey and Jack Mayer was 1989. And I started working in the area, shortly after. Nobody knew what it was at that time. It was very, very new, and people thought it was crazy. It was like an oxymoron, right? How can you be emotional and intelligent? But then Dan Goleman's book came out in 95, and that sort of popularized it. 5 million people purchased that book. So that's basically emotional intelligence. And you asked about hardiness as well.
Yeah, I want to know about hardiness, and then we'll jump back to emotional intelligence because I got a lot of questions.
So interestingly, a lot of the work on hardiness has been actually done in the U.S. military. It started out as a concept looking at, why people who go through difficult situations or tough situations are able to sort of survive and come out not just the way they were, but even stronger than they were before the situation. And the co-author in my book, Hardiness, Paul Bartone, was a retired colonel from the U.S. Army. He was actually the senior psychologist in the Army, taught at West Point. And he did a lot of the research in the military looking at this concept, everything from prisoners of wars to combat soldiers to veterans. And he's published a lot of research. And a lot of the research he's published has been in military journals or scientific journals. And our partnership came together because I want to take concepts into the corporate world, right? People outside the military weren't very familiar with this term hardiness. So a lot of the research that Paul and others have developed are now making its way into the organizational or corporate world.
Is that different from post-traumatic growth? I've heard that term used.
Yeah, it's similar. It's a bit more defined. So in hardiness, we talk about what we call the 3 C's, and we can get into this after, but the first is challenge. So when something difficult happens, the ability to sort of step back and look at it as a puzzle, as something to be solved, as opposed to get overly emotionally involved in the situation. The second C is control, that people who do well are able to sort of differentiate those aspects of a situation they can control versus what they can't control. Like you can control your own emotions, but you may not be able to control the weather, or an incoming threat may be uncontrollable for you. And the third one is commitment. And that has to do with having some kind of purpose in life in terms of something that you believe in, that guides you, that sort of keeps you going. So those three C's, after about 20 years of research, have found to be really differentiating factors in people, not just doing better after stress, but actually, as you mentioned, growing or enhancing their ability to perform.
So now that we have a pretty good threshold definition for both, and I definitely want to come back to hardiness, because that's an area that I've seen a lot in the workplace of just trying to balance the pushing people and doing hard work and going through difficult situations with trying to avoid having people burn out and trying to keep people, in a healthy place. Emotional intelligence, how did you first get interested in that back in, I guess, the early 90s?
Yeah, very early 90s. I started working as an ordinary psychologist, largely with adolescents and kids, and eventually got into the area of assessment. We started automating assessments when the first Apple computers came out. We're going back to the early 80s. And we pioneered a way of getting using automation to get information from kids, for example, in the mental health setting, who weren't revealing things to their therapists, things around sexual abuse, drug use, things that they just weren't telling therapists about, but we were able to collect it on computers. So I got involved in assessment and actually left my mental health position and set up a company to deal with this more. So I spent a number of years looking at basically what goes wrong with people. A lot of my work and research and development was in things like ADHD and anxiety and depression and all those kinds of things. So in the late 80s, I became more interested in what goes right with people. Why do we have people who succeed even when there's difficult circumstances surrounding them? They're able to come out ahead and do well in life. And around that time, late 80s, I met a psychologist named Reuven Bar-On, who did his doctoral thesis in the area of what we now know as emotional intelligence. And I became quite interested in that. And we took that work and really developed it further. And then I hooked up with Peter Salovey and Jack Mayer, the guys who actually invented the term emotional intelligence, and wrote the first paper on it. And started working away at and looking at people from all facets of life. I work with Olympic athletes, super athletes, super CEOs who are really successful, physicians, lawyers, top performing lawyers. On the one hand, people who are really successful in life, but then I also looked at people who are struggling in life. I did a study on homeless people, did a study on people in difficult stages of cancer, people with autism. So we looked at both spectrums, trying to see what factors differentiated those who really were able to succeed or overcome difficult circumstances versus those who succumbed to the difficulties and didn't quite make it. So that kind of boils down my work in emotional intelligence, how I got into it 25 or so years ago.
That's so cool. So I mentioned to you before we started recording that I teach emotional intelligence where I work. So I know just enough to be dangerous. And so what I want to do is just tell you a few of the things that have stood out to me as we've taught this, and maybe you can help correct some of this because it may not be fully accurate. So one of the things that I appreciate is that it seems to me that our IQ is largely fixed. Is that true?
More or less, yeah. We don't really go up very much or down very much in terms, unless we have a head injury or something, in terms of our IQ scores. They're pretty stable throughout the lifespan.
And then our personality also pretty fixed?
Pretty much. A lot of studies have looked at longitudinally from childhood to adulthood till when they're seniors. And basically, if you're an extrovert as a kid, you're outgoing, you had a lot of friends, you tend to remain pretty much that way throughout your lifetime. If you're kind of shy, introverted, you sort of stay that way throughout your lifespan.
And then what I love about emotional intelligence is that it seems to me that it's something that is very much not fixed, and it is something that can have an incredible impact on your ability to lead well, to have healthy relationships, to interact with other people, to kind of better understand your own emotions. And so it has this incredible impact on key areas of your life, but it's very much not fixed, is my understanding. Is that an accurate
Exactly.
way of thinking about
Yeah,
it?
we talk about it as malleable. Yeah, it can be changed in the right circumstances with often with things like coaching or there. A lot of what we've been looking at is how do you make those changes? How do you improve, for example, in these emotional skills? But yeah, you're absolutely right. It is. It has been shown to be changeable.
What do you think? What is something? Because I imagine a lot of folks listening have some sense of emotional intelligence in terms of they've heard a little bit about it. What is a misconception about emotional intelligence?
Well, one thing a lot of people tend to think is it means being nice to people. And that's not what emotional intelligence is. It's not about being nice to people. As I mentioned earlier, it's being aware of your emotions and using those emotions. And sometimes you've got to be angry at someone, or you're in a negotiation that's really tough. You got to show the right emotion at the right time to get what you want to get out of that situation. So it's not always about being nice. It's about using emotions in the best way possible for you to be more successful in life.
That's really helpful. A lot of times I think about, especially as we relate to other people's emotions, I think of empathy. And a lot of times my misunderstanding sometimes of empathy is that it just means being nice to people.
Yeah, see, there's a confusion between empathy and sympathy.
Yeah.
So sympathy is more of an I feeling. Oh, I feel bad that you lost your girlfriend or whatever. So it's how I feel. But empathy is more about knowing how you feel. So I say, oh, you must feel really upset about what she said to you the other day. So it's more about understanding. It's more about me walking in your shoes. That's what empathy is. So it doesn't mean that I take on that emotion. I just know where you're coming from. And that can help me as a leader, for example, to work with you, to understand you better, to find out what you really need to move forward. So it's a really important distinction. It may sound small, but we found that it makes a huge difference when you understand these emotions.
I know how good it feels to be on the other side of empathy when I'm going through something and my leader takes the time to kind of figure out, oh, wow, Cal, you have a lot on your plate, or hey, I know you've got something going on at home. I want to take the time to ask you some questions and get to know that situation. I guess kind of two questions, and I apologize for the kind of the two-parter here, but one, how can we become more empathetic? And then how do we balance empathy with the need in organizations to get a mission done, to make payroll, to whatever it is that your purpose and mission as a leader you're trying to accomplish, you've still got to get something done, obviously, while being empathetic.
So you're already alluding to it by asking questions, which is a good strategy. So it's doing it in a way that we're both on the same team, right? So it's like saying, Cal, you don't seem to be yourself lately. Is something bothering you, or is there something interfering with your performance, or trying to sort of understand what's happening with you and where you're coming from. Because in your second part, we're not going to move forward and get ahead and accomplish our goals if there's something interfering with your ability to perform. So it's really my responsibility to try and figure out what's stopping you from performing, what's keeping you behind. And it's tough sometimes because some people don't want to reveal personal things, what's going on. They're not getting along with their spouse, or their spouse wants to leave them, and it becomes very difficult, and maybe they don't want to talk about it. So we can go to the level of saying, well, I get the sense that there may be something personal that's upsetting you right now. Is that true? Is that what I'm sensing? And you may agree and say, yeah, I just don't feel like talking about it at work. So then I would say, well, you think it might be a good idea to maybe take some time off, or to see someone independently who may be able to help you with this, and really work with you to try and get to the bottom of what it is. Again, not act in an accusatory way, but in a helpful way, where I really want to get you through this phase, because this may be a temporary phase, we hope. And what can I do to sort of help you get through it?
Let's say someone has a big project that they're managing, and you're trying to be empathetic, But at least for me, in the back of my mind, I'm also thinking about like, we've got some serious deadlines here. I want to understand what this person is going through and maybe give them some space. But then someone else on the team is going to have to probably take on more work. And so now I also need to be empathetic to that person because they've got stuff going on too. So I'm just trying to think through kind of managing that tension between empathy and the mission. How should we be thinking about the management of that as leaders?
Okay, so the model of emotional intelligence that we use, and we can get a bit more into the model later, we move from empathy to what we call problem solving, which is the ability to weigh the different things without getting emotions sort of interfering with your decision-making process. So there becomes a point in that situation where that person may have to be taken off the project. I mean, it's just not working. And as you said, there's a lot of stress or pressure on getting the job done. So that's where you got to combine the empathy with the decision-making aspect of emotional intelligence, where there's three factors that we use in terms of decision-making. So we got to balance it. It's exactly what you said. We got to get to the bottom of it. What's going on? Is this something fixable? Is it fixable in the short term? Is this going to take a while to fix? And if it is, I got to remove this person, put in a replacement, or find some other way to cover that part of the work. But we can't let it fester. It's not just this never ending trying to understand you and get to the bottom. Mm-hmm. You're not playing therapist.
Yeah.
Yeah. You're just trying to understand in the general sense, where's this person coming from? Is this fixable? Do I have to move to plan B? Do I have to remove this person and do something else? Or does this person just need someone to talk to once or twice and then get through it? You know, how serious is this problem? Mm-hmm. And as a good leader, you'll be able to make that judgment. You'll be able to sort of step back objectively, look at the situation and say, you know what? I think Tom is going through a really hard time right now. I don't think he's going to be able to manage this project. And I'm going to have a heart-to-heart with him. I'm going to say, Tom, you know, I understand you're going through difficulties and you understand this is an important project and we've got to get this done. And I think it's best for you because you're stressing yourself. I don't want you to get overstressed. And it's best for us if we have someone else take over that position, right? But you've got, as a leader, that's what leadership is, really. You have to be able to read the situation and make a decision and move forward.
That's really helpful, even just thinking about that paradigm of going from empathy to problem solving. That I appreciate that. That helps me think through that. I mean, because empathy, like you said before, it doesn't mean just being nice. You're actually trying to understand and put yourself in the shoes of the other person. And then as you do that, or after you've done that, and you feel it, and you can kind of honestly say, I think I have a sense of what this person is going through. Then it's really getting kind of more practical and saying, okay, what are the next steps? That's kind of what I hear you saying is like, now we're actually getting through, okay, what is the go forward plan based on my new and hopefully more accurate understanding of the situation?
Exactly.
So let's talk a little bit about first self-awareness, that first bucket. How should we think about becoming self-aware, and how do we become more self-aware?
Okay, so the model we use has like 5 basic buckets, and that's the first one, which we call self-perception. This is the EQI 2.0 model, or emotional quotient inventory model that we use. So becoming aware of your own emotions has several levels. One is at a purely emotional feeling level. I'm feeling nervous right now, or I'm feeling excited, or just understanding that emotion. But there's also another level to it, which we call self-actualization, which is the bigger picture in terms of my overall well-being, the job that I'm doing. I love the job that I do, or I really hate the kind of job. I'm looking for something else. So it's a sense of your belonging in the world, and you're learning and developing and doing the things that you really want to do. So it starts at the micro level of I'm feeling anxious, I'm feeling happy, I'm feeling sad, and then moving it up the ladder, being aware of that, emotional self-awareness we talk about, and then self-regard, how that makes you feel as a person. In other words, I feel happy with myself, or I'm not satisfied with where I am in life or with myself. And then moving that to what we call self-actualization, which is, wow, I'm doing the work I really want to do. I'm leading a team of people. It's an exciting area of work that I'm doing. This is where I want to be, and I just want to keep growing in this position. So it's 3 levels of self-awareness, or what we call self-perception, is the first bucket.
Are there any tools or strategies that people can implement to become more self-aware, kind of using that as a general sense?
Yeah, there's lots of tools. In my books, I usually have like a checklist type of thing to start with. And it's simple things like, how I feel about my life right now generally, how I feel about my day, how I feel about my week. So you talk about how happy or sad you are with the way things are going in your life. And we also break it down into different areas of your life: my work life, my relationships, my social life. Do I have the friends that I really enjoy being with, or are there other friends I'd rather be with? Is my relationship strong? Do I feel satisfied at home? How do I feel about kids? If I have kids, how I feel about that. So we break it down into different areas of life, and then you look at yourself in each of those areas of life, and you really try and piece together, where you would like it to be in each of those areas. I'd really, maybe I'm not doing so good at workplace. I'd like to be happier there, or whatever. And then you set about a plan. What do I do? Is it, I don't like the place that I'm working. I like the industry that I'm in, or I don't like the industry I'm in. I'd like a whole new direction. But it takes a bit of work. It's not obviously a simple thing. And in my books, either EQ for Dummies or the EQ Edge, I tend to outline some of these steps and how you can move forward in them.
Just curious, even more practically, what does this look like to start to ask yourself these questions and start to get more familiar with these emotions?
Well, the first step might be doing it on your own, safe, because some people don't want to talk to someone else or just want to think about it first before they go to that next step. Probably one of the most effective ways we found for people is with a coach. A coach who's properly trained, who, especially in this area, in emotional intelligence, who really knows how to work with these ideas and concepts and help guide you along into really finding yourself, your purpose, where you want to go in life, and can give you guidance or suggestions on how to get there. But you may want to start on yourself, kind of journaling, and ideally in a structured way. We lay out a structure in terms of how to do that, but you can do it unstructured if you want. Just sit down and think about it. One of the things that you alluded to that's important in emotional intelligence is this awareness of emotions, because emotions are like signposts. They're signals. That's why we have emotions, right? They warn us. So if there are negative ones, it's not a great idea to avoid them. What we want to do is be aware of them and say, hey, I'm not feeling good about X or Y or whatever. And it's a signal. So that signals to you, well, maybe I can do something. Maybe I can change something to alter that, right? What does that mean for me? And sometimes, we don't admit to ourselves, like I go to work every day. Am I happy? Maybe not. I feel like, pain in my stomach when I got to get up in the morning, whatever. Those are signals. And I guess the idea is an emotionally intelligent person pays attention to those signals and says, well, what does this mean? Is this really telling me something that maybe I don't like my job, or maybe I don't like the people that I gotta see in my workplace, or whatever, right? It's a signal. So think of emotions as signals, and that gives you guidance in terms of what I got to do from here. Where do I go from here? And I think that's a real important step.
Can you share maybe an example or two of what that's looked like, maybe in your own life, or just maybe someone that you've worked with, to kind of identify an emotion and then start to take some form of action in response to that?
We see it a lot, especially in the workplace, where they know there's something wrong. They know it's like they're really big TGIF. Thank God it's Friday. I want the weekend. I can't wait for the weekend. Versus in my organization, we have a lot of TGIMs. Thank God it's Monday, because I get to come back and interact with people that I like with. So we've seen that where people have that feeling, that sort of gut-wrenching feeling starting work each day. And so I explore with them, tell me about your work day, what happens. And in one case, for example, it was somebody who worked in customer service position. And she just, dreaded the day, getting on there, dealing with these customers, having people scream at her. It just wasn't pleasant, right? But she wasn't admitting it to herself because she felt she needed the job, she needed the money, and there was no option to that, no alternative. So we would explore things like, what really interests you? What do you get excited about? And it turned out that she was good in planning things, right? She liked to plan her vacation. She liked to plan things for her husband and her family. That's what really got her excited when she got home from work and said, even though it's 6 months away, she's planning all the details of a vacation. So we started exploring how those skills could maybe help her and got her to think of getting into the event planning business because she loved parties and all those details. And eventually we transitioned her out of customer service into working for an event planning agency where she was just now happy and doing stuff. She really enjoyed doing it. She loved the people. She loved the positive experience of it. She loved the details of the planning, going to the events, making sure everyone was happy is working. So people can totally change their lives if they stop and think and see, what are these signals? What do they mean to me? And how can I sort of use that to make my life better? And that's just one simple example, but we have tons and tons of them.
Yeah, man, that's great. It's a really great example. I want to shift a little bit to hardiness. We've already kind of defined it, but what are we trying to do when it comes to hardiness? I guess, how should leaders be thinking about that for themselves, or how should leaders be thinking about developing hardiness on their teams?
Yeah, I think both are important. So in terms of yourself, hardiness, again, when we think about exercising, building muscle, we don't wait till we have the big fight to start thinking, oh, I better get into shape. We build up these muscles so that we're prepared when we have to get into the ring, we're ready for it. And hardiness is much like that. There are things you can do to prepare yourself and it's all sort of mindset. It's your sort of mental approach to things. So what we do, and we outline a lot of these steps in our book, where you, for example, prepare for challenge. When a problem happens, what are the things you can do? How do you prepare yourself in advance for when a difficult situation happens? Things like, well, let me just step back. Let me just hold on and step back and look at it as though I was a third person. Someone, a friend of mine is looking at me in this situation. What would they do? How would they view the situation? And there's a whole series of steps to turn it into more of a challenge than this thing that's overwhelming me and I'm overly emotional about. So that's one aspect. And the other is control. Working with athletes, top ranked tennis players. I mean, when you work with someone in that situation, they go into a match, the weather's awful, they can't control the weather, their opponent is dissing them, call it whatever, trying to make them look. They can't control what their opponent does, but what they can control is where they stand on the court, how they serve the ball, their own part of their play is what they can control. So instead of getting all upset about the weather, I can't play in this terrible wind, what am I going to do? They focus more on, okay, this is a good time for me to do this and to try this and to try that other thing, and focus on that. And the third one is commitment. And commitment's important because we need kind of that North Star. We need that purpose in life. One example, a tennis player that I write about in my book, she won the U.S. Open, but that was her goal since she was about 13 or 14 years old. She could have visualized herself standing there getting the check as a winner of the U.S. Open tennis. So, but there was more to it, of course. So visualization is one of those steps, but having the goal is the other important part of it. If we think about ourselves and where we want to be in life down the road, and we can map that out, including the obstacles that might stop us from getting there, it's amazing how much you can accomplish when you get these steps in place.
Do you have any tips for people when they're in those moments? Kind of, you mentioned like the tennis player who's got something negative going on in that moment, things to think about or ways to reframe. I'm just curious, are there things that you teach that might be helpful for leaders?
Yeah, there's a whole series of things. And again, they're in the book. But things like the tennis player, before she would serve or start, it's like running your fingers on the string, sort of as a reminder. Okay, that gets me to focus. I use music a lot. So even in my own work, to motivate, when I'm writing a book, for example, I have a very busy schedule and I may have 2 hours in the week on Friday afternoon to write my book. I can't waste those 2 hours. I got to make sure they're productive. So I will play some music that will put me in the right frame of mind to do that. In my case, I was playing Van Morrison for this book. And if that didn't work, I would switch it. I'd play the rock group Chicago, and that would really get me into my writing mind frame of mind. So those are things, breathing exercises we use. Sometimes it's just stop and take a breath. It takes your mind off the other things you're thinking about and gets you to refocus on the thing that you've got to focus on. So there are a lot of techniques, and you got to pick the one that works for you. We're all different and we all respond in different ways, but we give a selection of different techniques that you can pick and choose and work with that helps you get in the right frame of mind to do what you got to do.
Can you talk a little bit about visualization? You mentioned that. So when I was at West Point, we had this Center for Enhanced Performance. And that was the first time that I'd ever heard about visualization. I was on the football team and they started teaching us that. And it was really powerful. And I wish I remembered more of what they taught us. How should leaders be thinking about visualization, or what does that look like in real life, I guess?
So what we do is use it in advance, right? It's not something that you save up for the moment before something happens. So we get you to focus on a goal, whether it's winning that contract or winning that tennis match or whatever it is. And you start off imagining yourself in that situation where you've won. Then you take a step back and you think of some of the things that may prevent you from winning. The other person does something unexpected or whatever. So we get you to visualize the obstacles. And you imagine in your mind, what are those obstacles? And then we get you to come back and then think about what are some of the ways you can overcome some of those obstacles, right? And we get you to visualize that, here I am overcoming the obstacle. In the case I outlined in the book with this tennis player, she had to face Serena Williams in the finals. And she was prepared to start off really strong and be ahead and winning. And then we know Serena is really strong coming back. So they actually had her imagine the comeback. And when she got to the right score, she pictured herself serving to the upper right-hand side of Serena, because she knew she was weaker on that particular side when she served that way. And she did that. She followed through on these images. She practicing for months, this whole scenario, and was able to beat her, was able to win in this match.
Wow.
So it's amazing. If you use visualization and you do it the right way, it can help you overcome a lot of different kinds of obstacles. But again, it takes practice. It takes time. You have to really adhere to it and do it the right way.
How often are they bringing that vision to mind? Is that like a daily thing, or is that just there's a more compressed time where you do it more intensely?
Elite athletes would do it daily. I mean, they
Okay.
practice daily, so it would be part of their morning routine. They would start off maybe visualizing some of these things. They'd be assigned certain things to work on, and then they go do their physical practice, and they do some mental practice. So it's usually combined. It's usually a daily routine, but that's an elite athlete. I mean, it's not your average person. Your average person, maybe once a week or so, can kind of sit back and say, okay, here's where I want to be, and here's some of the things I can do to get there. If this gets in my way, rather than just worrying about this obstacle, I can think, okay, how might I see myself getting past this obstacle?
The idea of is it the reticular activating system? Just this idea of like what we think about, it becomes what we focus on. What we focus on expands. Can you speak to that? Because I am fascinated with that idea of, even just the other day, for example, I did some work where I was trying to I have my core values that I try to be very clear on, and I try to remind myself of those daily. And I find that when I really think about my core values on a consistent basis, and I even get very practical of like, okay, how does this core value show up in my day-to-day life? And it helps me to just kind of center me as I go through kind of the ups and downs. But I don't really understand what's happening in my brain. I don't really understand the science behind it. But it does seem like I had a friend who, started looking at Teslas and just mentioned that like all of a sudden they started to see and notice all the different Teslas on the road, but they didn't notice them before. So it's just this I wonder if you could just speak to, because it seems to me that's connected to this idea of visualization, or just like we keep putting something before our mind or putting an idea or something to focus on, and then that thing becomes larger and maybe our kind of orients the way we operate.
It's a great example. We call it selective attention. So when we selectively attend to a certain thing, we tend to focus more on it and we tend to do more in that. The Tesla is a great example of that. You become aware suddenly of that thing and you quickly notice it. And you talk about reticular activating system. That's important in terms of impulse control and attention. So it kind of diverts your attention to when a Tesla comes, boom, it lights up. So in our lives, when we're trying to, like what you're doing in terms of your core values, it helps when we not only think of those core values, but also as you're doing each day, we apply it to something different. It kind of stretches it. It stretches it. So I think of core values in terms of how it fits my workplace. But the next day I may be thinking of my core values. How does that fit my relationship with my partner? Or we think of it in socially, when I'm with my friends, do I still show let's say my core value is honesty. Am I honest with my friends? Am I honest at work with the people I work with? Am I honest with my partner? And what does that mean to be honest? Like, how honest am I? I mean, if she doesn't look good in a dress, do I tell her it looks bad? So you really work on those core values, and the more you think about them and focus on them, hopefully the better you'll get at them.
I wonder if you could just, in the last few minutes, just talk a little bit about this new book you have out, Emotional Intelligence for Dummies, the second edition. You've also got Hardiness, Making Stress Work for You. So just tell us a little bit about anything else that we just haven't covered that you'd like people to know about those books, and then just where people can track with you. You do some really cool work. I mean, you consult with reality TV shows, Big Brother Canada, The Amazing Race Canada, MasterChef Canada, Bachelor Canada. So you live a very fun life and fascinating. So I guess in these last few minutes we have, talk to folks about the books and some of the work you're doing and where they can track with you.
Sure. Yeah, I'm passionate about what I do. I love my work. I hope that shows. So the Dummies book, I was asked to write that by Wiley. I had written my first book on emotional intelligence was the EQ Edge. And that was really well received. That became a best-selling book, still out there. But it was focused more on the workplace. I sort of focused that with my co-author on the workplace. So when they wanted me to write Dummies, they wanted me to expand the use of emotional intelligence both at home, socially. So I talk about parenting. I talk about adolescent kids. I've got my grandkids and my kids. I've been through it. So we talk about how these skills apply in those areas, as well as in terms of relationships and friends and socially. So it really expands emotional intelligence into those other areas and gives you a lot. And Dummies book have a formula. The way they explained it to me when I started was because I didn't know much about the Dummies books, but it's written for someone who's a brain surgeon who wants to learn how to use a computer, right? It's written for people who are really smart in one area, but this is a subject they really don't know anything about. So when you write a Dummies book, you're writing from the very basics, like this is what emotional intelligence is, and define it and describe it, and then get into the more complex as you go through, but very practically. Here's things you can do. You want a better relationship with your adolescent daughter? Here's some steps you can take that will help you with that relationship. So that's what that book is about. The Hardiness book, as I mentioned, I wrote with Paul Bartone, retired colonel, U.S. Army, just a lovely guy. He taught at West Point, did a lot of the research at West Point, found that hardiness outperformed in terms of West Point leadership, outperformed grit, outperformed resilience, a lot of the other measures that were being used. So he's done some really exciting work, and still does a lot of consulting to militaries around the world in terms of this work and what it means for people in the military and beyond. So the two books, and in that book we give you the definition that I alluded to of the 3 C's of hardiness. But we go into I talk about famous people and how it applied to them, how they've had difficult times in their lives and overcame it. People in pop culture, people like Lady Gaga, Madonna, some of the things they went through and how these principles applied. But I also talk about one of the most difficult things that anyone ever would experience in life, which is being a prisoner of war. So we talk about John McCain's experience. We talk about other prisoners and research that has been done on people who have come out of that situation in terms of having been a prisoner of war, those who adapted afterwards versus those who really never got back to themselves after that situation. So we deal with the whole spectrum of life, from some of the most difficult situations that people have gone through. And I look at fun stuff like pop culture, and I work in reality TV, so I have a lot of experience there. And I work with musicians and with people in the entertainment world. So there's things you can learn from that. And I got some stuff on police officers, homicide detectives, and all kinds of interesting areas of life where these concepts of hardiness can help people do better in life.
Fascinating. Wow. What a neat life and body of work you have, Dr. Stein. And I'm excited to get these books. I haven't had a chance to read either of the books. I especially am excited when you mentioned just kind of going into some of the personal relationships, children. As someone who's got 2 kids right now, that would really benefit me. So I am excited to check that out. And one quick question, since you mentioned grit, I know people are probably familiar with Angela Duckworth's work on grit. How is hardiness different from grit?
So probably the main difference in a nutshell is that, when you're doing grit, it's just about plowing it, putting your head down and going forward. So for example, if I want to be a concert pianist, I would just keep going and going and going, even though I don't really have the talent and I'm never going to make it. So what we would do is with hardiness, it's about challenge. It's about realizing that may not be attainable. Mm-hmm. Maybe you'd be better as a music teacher or a studio musician or playing in a band, like looking for other ways to use that skill. Two quick studies on grit that will help you maybe grasp this. One study looked at gamblers in Las Vegas. Gamblers with higher grit lost way more money, right? Because they don't give up. They just keep going.
Another perseverance.
Exactly. And another study looked at mountain climbers. Mountain climbers with higher grit were more likely to die trying to reach the top of the mountain because they don't stop and think. And our work with hardiness looked at athletes, and athletes who have an injury, who are higher in hardiness, are more likely to step back and heal that injury, whereas those with more grit will keep going, and that injury may ruin their career for life. So those are kind of the differences between hardiness and grit. And as I mentioned at West Point, Paul did some great research looking at leadership there, and the ones with more hardiness did better than the ones with more grit.
That's fascinating. Last question, I apologize, but I think you mentioned resilience. Is resilience distinct from hardiness?
So we see resilience as bouncing back from a stressful event and going to where you were. We see hardiness as taking you forward, being better than you were. If you learn these skills of challenge, control, and commitment and improve in them, you're going to be even stronger than you were before that negative event impacted your life.
Wow. Dr. Stein, this has been so fun for me. I knew that we would run out of time, and I'm just very grateful for your work and for the way you're able to explain these concepts that are really some of these are not that easy to understand, but you have a very simple and helpful way of explaining them. So thank you for that. And I'll give you the final word. Anything else you want folks to know, but just really appreciate your time today.
It was great to be with you, Cal. If you want to know more, my website is stevenstein.com, or for more about the tools or instruments we use, mhs.com. Those are the 2 places where you can find out more information.
Well, thank you, Dr. Stein. I appreciate it. Well, friend, thanks so much for sticking around to the end. I'm honored that you would spend this time with me. I hope you enjoyed that conversation with Dr. Stein. If you did, please share this episode with a friend. You never know how it might help someone else. And as we go from theory to application, the first step to increasing your emotional intelligence is to increase your self-awareness. So I want to encourage you to just take one step this week to become more self-aware. You could start by simply monitoring your emotions, jot them down in a journal, or maybe ask 3 people in your life what it's like to do life with you. Tell them that you're trying to see their perspective. Tell them that you're not going to be defensive. You just want to get a sense of what they see in you. in an encouraging, loving way and journal about the feedback. It's amazing how just simply asking questions and welcoming feedback helps us get a sense of what it's like to be on the other side of this. I'm excited to dive into Dr. Stein's books. If you're interested in joining me, there's going to be links to those books in the show notes of this episode. I heard Jim Collins say the other day that life is people. And I just love that. The quality of our life is often a direct result of the quality of our relationships, and becoming more emotionally intelligent can really help with that. So I hope you will go and invest in the people around you, invest in your family, invest in your team, invest in your community. Remember that life is short. Let's go make it count.